Welcome to the Silver Lyming. My name is Anne Desjardins. I'm your host, and the reason I brought this podcast to life is because I really feel there's a tremendous value in expressing the fact that there is hope for those going through tick and or tick-borne illnesses and chronic illness as well. And I just really want people to have the idea that you can get better. It's not pie in the sky. It is something that you can absolutely do. It might be the hardest thing that you've ever done in your entire life, and I'm probably saying that because it was for me, but it is possible, and that's really the mainstay of this. I would like to obviously give a little bit more awareness and education around tick-borne illnesses and some of the things that we have to keep in mind. But again, you can get better, and so maybe stay out of some of the support groups online. They can be a little bit dark and dreary, if you will, and focus your sights on things like what I have to share with you and the different guests that I've brought forth, because it's not just me who has healed from this. There are so many people. My guest today is one of those people who has healed from this. He's been in the medical space now for 30 years. He's dedicated his life to medicine. He had his own health crisis with chronic Lyme disease, which abruptly changed his life and quality of life and the practice of medicine that he was actually doing. And he really started to look into some of the possibilities of alternative treatments. And he's been able to restore his own health through holistic and herbal therapies. It's not just me, it's also this person. And he has been one of the biggest reasons why I've gotten better. I'm trying to stay calm here because it's like my ultimate dream guest ever that I could have on my show. I really latched onto his story. It was one of the first books that I was able to process when I started to regain my health and my brain. And I'm just so thrilled to have you here with us today, Dr. Bill Rawls. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. And I really, again, just value what you teach. It's in alignment so much with what I have begun to believe as well. I became an Ayurvedic practitioner myself, and Ayurveda, I think you probably are familiar with that, but it's the oldest holistic medicine system we have on earth. And it's just really pushed me past conventional medicine, got me maybe 85% of the way. And I really had to look outside the box to fix myself the rest of the way. And actually, I like to think of myself as being maybe back to 110% of where I started with my health, because I'm certainly so much healthier now than I was before I got sick. So again, thank you for being here. If you don't mind, for my listeners, if they aren't familiar with you, could you just share a little bit more about your story with Lyme and tick-borne illness, please?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure. Um, it's a story, none of us really plan on becoming chronically ill. It happens. And as a physician, it's like, how could this have happened to me? I just wasn't planning to be chronically ill in my late 40s by any means. But retrospectively, I was doing all the things that set myself up for it. And when we look at chronic Lyme disease, what is a big part of the puzzle and what's so interesting is most people don't get sick at the time of the tick bite. There are exceptions to that, and we can talk about those, but most people pick the bacteria up sometime at an earlier time. And for me, it was probably during my childhood playing in the woods. And I considered myself healthy. Graduated from medical school 40 years ago, 1985. Went into obstetrics and gynecology because, quite frankly, I looked at how they were treating patients with medical therapies with chronic illness, and I just didn't want to do that. So OBGYN was young people bringing life into the world. The interventions were acute. So yeah, it did a lot of good, maybe saved some lives along the way. But it wasn't managing chronic illness. And but one of the things that you had to do with OBGYN back then was take call. You were responsible for labor and delivery in the hospital emergency room. And for me in a small town, that was every second to third night. And most nights when I was on call, I got 2 or 3 hours sleep at the most. It was rare when I got more than 6 hours when I was on call. Every second to third night, every second to third weekend, from Friday morning until Monday morning, I was on call. And in my 30s, I just pushed through it. I just didn't get sleep. And there was a lot of other stress in my life trying to balance community and, be a husband and be a father and all of those kinds of things. And what got shorted was sleep. By my mid 40s, I started losing the ability to sleep and catch up when I wasn't on call. And my body started breaking down. And by my late 40s, after about 20 years doing OBGYN, I just couldn't do it anymore and had to stop doing obstetrics, had to leave my group, still had to do generate income. So I started a primary care practice, just doing primary care and gynecology, didn't have the night call, but I wasn't getting any better. My body was breaking down, and it wasn't just that I wasn't sleeping. I was having heart issues and brain issues, and my gut was a wreck, and aches and pains, and my joints were falling apart. I mean, everything, everything. Every day I woke up feeling like I had the flu. It was really hard to go to work, and especially in a small town where you really couldn't tell people that you were sick. And a lot of Lyme folks get stuck with that is you have to look normal or people just don't accept you. And I was very much in that position. I made a lot of excuses. But all the while, I was trying to regain my health and figure out what was going on. And I saw just loads of specialists looking for answers. Had a lot of symptoms of MS, but didn't quite meet the cutoffs for that. Some indications of autoimmune, but not enough for an autoimmune illness. Settled on a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, that all that gets you is drugs for the symptoms. Kept searching. I was like, there's got to be something. And finally, I discovered that there's a high probability that I was carrying this Lyme bacteria. So that changed my focus. And I found people that would give me antibiotics, went through several rounds of antibiotics that made me sicker instead of better. And at that point, I was pretty familiar with Lyme disease and what was going on and all the controversy and everything else, and just didn't want to do IV antibiotics and all the other therapies, ozone, different things that people were doing. My intuition steered me away from them, and I just really couldn't afford to leave town or pay that much money either. Um, and came upon a herbal protocol for Lyme disease and thought, I don't have high expectations, but I don't think I'm going to lose much here. So I did it. I really embraced it and thought, if the herbs actually work, they're going to wreck my gut just like the antibiotics did. That didn't happen. And over 3 months, I just kept getting better. And over about a 3 to 5 year period, all the symptoms went away and I got my health back completely. And it totally changed my life. Wasn't just herbs, I changed my lifestyle. I really put sleep down as a priority. I went through all kinds of stuff to get there. But yeah, I haven't turned back and changed my life in a remarkable way. And it really caused me to think about chronic illness extremely differently than I do now, not just chronic Lyme disease. And I tend to think about chronic Lyme disease very differently the conventional community that doesn't even recognize it as a diagnosis, but also very differently than a lot of the Lyme community too. So that's where I am.
Great. And could you talk a little bit more about how you're seeing this so differently than the rest of the world, so to speak?
Yeah, I think everybody, and I did in the beginning, looked at the illness as I've gotten this bacteria, that bacteria is making me sick, and I have to kill that bacteria to get well. I realize now that it's not just a bacteria. We all have co-infections, but it's actually a whole lot more complicated than that. And it's not as much about the microbes. It's about the body's loss of the body's ability to contain these microbes. And that's what's significant. So these Lyme bacteria, And the co-infections, Bartonella, Borrelia, Babesia, Anaplasma, there's a long list. And then other things we pick up like chlamydias and mycoplasmas and all kinds of viruses, Epstein-Barr, Parvo, there's a long list. We pick these things up in life and they can become dormant inside of our tissues. So, one of the defense mechanisms of all of these that's been well documented is they can invade cells and they can grow slowly or even go dormant inside cells, and that allows them to persist in the body. So when they infect you, their goal isn't making you sick as much as it is just establishing a presence. And to do that, they have to get past the immune system and reside in some isolated place in the body. And what they basically want is to hang around until other opportunities come along that they can spread to other hosts, i.e., the host gets bitten by a lot more ticks. So making the host bedridden is not a good way to do that. So they're just hanging out, and where they hang out is inside of our cells. And this has really been a key part of the research that I've been reviewing for the past decade, is the fact that all of these microbes, and it's not just the tick-borne microbes, even Streptococcus and other things can hide out inside cells and slow their growth or go dormant and just hang out for very long periods of time. And it's not until we're stressed, till we take night call every other night for 20 years, or eat bad food, or exposed to toxic substances, or, all those stress factors, those things start adding up in our lives. They stress those cells, which are basically peppered throughout our body. And those things start reactivating and start breaking down our tissues. And that's basically what chronic Lyme is. But it's also what other chronic illnesses are. So when you start looking for connections between all the things that I just mentioned and other chronic illnesses, you find them there too. MS, you find Borrelia, chlamydia, mycoplasmas, Epstein-Barr, all of them. So I don't look at a person as a diagnosis anymore. I find that, that concept of diagnosis in chronic illness is really very flawed. Like acute illness, it's really important. You break your leg, we need to know which leg, where it's broken, how badly it's broken, so we can go in and fix it. So acute illness, acute bacterial pneumonia, where you've got a bacteria that is turning over every 20 minutes, somebody can get sick really fast and antibiotics can save their life. Borrelia, it turns over. It's doubling time compared to that 20 minutes with a pneumococcal bacteria, 12 to 24 hours in its most active state. So it's not surprising that even people who get antibiotics with acute Lyme disease, 20% of them go on and develop symptoms later. And I'm not sure antibiotics ever get rid of Borrelia, even if you get it right after a tick bite. Truly. But those are different bacteria. So that concept of diagnosis and chronic illness is very arbitrary. It's like you can have all the symptoms that are common with MS, which a lot of people with Lyme disease do, and demyelination, the process of Lyme of MS has been shown to happen in Lyme disease. But if you don't make the cutoffs, you don't get the diagnosis and you don't get treated. So having a diagnosis isn't quite as golden as it's made out to be. And in the conventional world, it's like if you get diagnosed with MS, you get drugs to block the demyelination, but the drugs don't do anything to address the causes of the demyelination that's driving the illness, so people don't get well. But there are a lot of people that have gotten well from MS by changing their diet, changing their lifestyle, restoring their cellular health, so they put those microbes back in a box. So these concepts really apply to every chronic illness. There's a microbe component, fundamentally, we can see a lot of these same things going on.
Thought about this so many times, and that was one of my questions that I had for you was, So like I still struggle with a little bit of PTSD at the thought of getting another tick on me. And it's frustrating because I want to go outside, I want to spend time outside, and I keep reminding myself that, and it's not a singular tick bite that causes this for people. This is like accumulation of all kinds of environmental toxins, different lifestyles, stressors, things to that nature that I think ultimately tip the scale to unwellness. And so I'm grateful to hear you say that because it's just sort of reinforcing the thought in my mind that it's like, no, 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 I don't ever want to get bitten again. But in the effort to avoid what I went through previously, like I think by having a healthy lifestyle, sleeping, making sure I'm taking care of myself. And that's what I try to explain to people is like all the things that we should be doing
Right.
anyways, like that's what you need to do to help yourself heal. And I keep saying, okay, well, I know that I think if I were to be bitten again now, it wouldn't get as sick as I had been before. I was living in a moldy
That's
house.
right.
I was under a great deal of stress. I was eating horribly. So I was drinking alcohol. It's like all these things that are bad. It just opened the door up for true, like ultimate disease to walk into my life. And so thank you for
Yeah.
elaborating on that a little bit because I just think people maybe miss the mark in going with the diagnosis as well. Like we're not our disease, we're humans, we're a fluid living breathing organism and we're always going to have things in our body, but it's just how we're supporting our body to manage those things that matters the most. And what do they say with epigenetics? Genes load the gun, it's lifestyle that pulls the trigger. And I think that's, kind of falling into that thought path of just making sure that you're doing the things to stay healthy. Do you feel like if you were to be bitten again, do you think you would get as sick as you had gotten the first time around?
No, no, I'm sure that I wouldn't, and I have been bitten a couple of times since that big, traumatic event in my life. Um, but I still don't invite ticks to bite me or
That's really
mosquitoes
cool.
or anything else. So I'm pretty particular about that. I figure the fewer opportunities we have for things to enter our body, the better. But I'm not quite as paranoid as I was at one point. I still am out in nature a lot. Quite frankly, though, one of the reasons that I've chosen to be a coastal dweller is there are not many ticks on beaches. And I don't invite them. I do a lot of outdoor activities, but a lot of it is out on the water, or in places where there aren't ticks. And but that being said, I've done a fair amount of hiking since then in Maine in summertime and other locations all around. We tend to vacation less though, where there would be ticks or other kinds of things. But getting out in nature is really important, and I think that's one thing that most people are missing in their lives is not getting in nature. I do walk in the woods every single day, but I choose, whenever we go hiking, I tend to choose paths that are open, that there's not a lot I don't go through brush. I don't go through places where I would invite ticks, especially the small seed ticks. And typically, if I'm hiking where there might be ticks, then I use an essential oil spray, just to minimize the exposure to them. And at the same time, I mean, yeah, everybody suggests wearing clothes. I think that's a good idea, wearing long pants, that sort of thing. But being that I'm not going through brush, I want to know if they're on me, and I've just developed this kind of sixth sense about anything that hits my legs. So I continue to wear shorts in the summertime. But boy, I'm vigilant. I'm constantly looking down at my legs and brushing my legs. And I typically take a shower when I get home. But it's partly your environment. Oddly enough, the woods around the Wilmington, North Carolina area where I live, we just don't see ticks, and I don't know what it is. It may be that we have a lot of raptors, hawks, and owls in our area, and we don't have as many mice. We have deer. There are deer everywhere, But my dog and I go walking in the woods every single day, and I haven't seen a tick yet here. That being said, you can go to the barrier islands with maritime forest along our coast, and they're just covered in ticks. They're everywhere. So, I tend to stay away from places where it's a known risk. But so minimizing our exposure, I think, is a reasonable thing. I mean, we don't want to invite anything more in our body than we have to, and these things are still pathogens. I mean, they may be stealth pathogens, but they're still pathogens. And quite frankly, we need to be smarter as a culture about it. When I was born, there were 3 billion people on Earth, and now there are 8 billion, and everybody is flying everywhere. I mean, you can't go outside and look up and not see a contrail. And so we are more mobile than humans have ever been. So we're spreading a lot of microbes around. And, so it's not just your local exposure anymore. You're getting exposed to a lot of things from a lot of people. So overall, beyond just being tick vigilant, I'm more vigilant in general. Meeting people, close contact with people, crowded places. There I am a little bit more particular because I think there are a lot of scary things that could be passed around that are probably worse than the ticks.
Do you think once the microbes are in people's bodies, can you ever make them come out again, or they'll always be there? It's just whether they're in a state of active or dormant.
Yeah, we don't have any good ways of answering that question, right? Because we don't really have any good ways of testing for them. So if you think about it, I mean, I think about, what most people think about Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, and a few other co-infections that they might have or might have been tested for. But when you look at all the possibilities throughout a lifetime, and the fact that right now, while you and I are speaking, there are bacteria and other microbes that are crossing from our gut, our gums, our sinuses, our skin into our bloodstream. And so these things are happening throughout our life, and there's a growing sense that we have a tissue and blood microbiome. Some scientists are disputing this, but the evidence I'm looking at is pretty ironclad because looking outside of humans, you can very readily find it in animals of microbes that are dormant inside tissues. Now, if things are in a quiescent or dormant state inside cells, you're not going to have an immune reaction and you don't have any blood level of that microbe. It's not in the bloodstream. So you wouldn't know about it. The only way to know about it is to biopsy deep tissues, basically chop people up. And we just don't routinely do that with healthy people. But there have been a few studies that they've done that with animals and found, yeah, they do actually have microbes, bacteria and other microbes buried inside their cells. And so gathering that information, we're just piecemealing it. There are a couple of studies where they looked at the brains of one study, brains of people with MS, one study with brains of people with Alzheimer's. These were autopsy specimens. And interestingly, they found hundreds of species of bacteria inside the brains of people with those diseases. But in both studies, they did age matched controls of people who had died of something other than a neurodegenerative disease, and they found hundreds of species of bacteria in them too. Mainly from the gut and skin and sinuses, though, not as much from the outside. And it just brings up some big question marks of, do we have this dormant tissue and blood microbiome that is affecting our risk of illness? That reactivation of this thing could explain most illnesses that we have. And I think we're getting closer and closer to understanding that model. Still a lot of questions out there. We may have things inside our cells or inside our tissues that are actually beneficial for us. I think it's going to take another decade or more to completely, to evaluate that question. But when you look at it as a theory, starts explaining the unexplainable. Because if you ask a conventional doctor what causes an illness like MS or an autoimmune disease or anything else, they say, we just don't know. It just happens. It's multifactorial. There are lots of factors that are coming together, and there's so many, we just don't pay attention to any of that. And it's like, really? That's the best you can do? Because there's a whole lot of evidence now that's showing that diet and toxic substances we're exposed to, and these stealth microbes that I'm talking about, and all these other factors, yeah, they are a big issue, and that's what's driving chronic illness. And we are exposed to a lot more of those things than we ever have been in in human history. So it's not surprising we're seeing a lot more chronic illness. But it doesn't fit into the neat diagnosis and treatment model that they live by. And, but quite frankly, if looking at conventional treatments for chronic illness, the most you can expect is to live in a state of managed illness, taking drugs to suppress your symptoms and other manifestations of the disease for the rest of your life, not wellness. And so their promise is not wellness. It's not moving to a better state. And I've just seen, my personal situation and talking to too many people with all kinds of different chronic illnesses that have chosen a different pathway and gotten well, to say that model is broken, and we need to be looking at it differently. I can't imagine if we took half the money we're putting into drug research right now and put it into really investigating and optimizing use of herbal therapies and dietary modifications and all the other things that we could potentially be doing, wow, we'd run circles around everything that's being done in conventional medicine.
Yeah. And I mean, you're touching on something that I believe in tremendously, is just follow the money, right? And it's upsetting to me to think about how many people are suffering and going through continual chronic illnesses, and their doctors, no offense to them, I'm related to a ton of Western medicine doctors, but they're not asking those kinds of questions or thinking about like the root cause of things, or telling them to change their diet or adopt a healthier lifestyle. Some of them are, I think, coming on board with that, but it's frustrating to just think about the fact that we're in a society nowadays where we want to take a pill and be fixed. And that's part of the rapid pace of life that we're living anymore. It's so much more accelerated than it used to be traditionally. And we want it now. We want it now. We want it. And of course, like when you don't feel well, you want it now too. You don't want to be sick, but I think we're missing the mark when we're not taking the time to assess people's actual lifestyle, nutrition. And I mean, I can think of even one of my clients who they put her on medication that's known to cause cancer, and she was having horrible heartburn, and I started to question her on her diet and what was she doing for herself. And here she came to say that she was drinking 12 8-ounce cans or 8 12-ounce cans of soda water a day. And I was like, well, you may as well be sipping battery acid all day long because it's so acidic, and no wonder you have this issue. She stopped that, her symptoms went away. But I'm not a doctor. I'm just, an Ayurvedic practitioner. Like, someone should be talking to her about this in the medical field. But at any rate, I'm very passionate about that thought. And I just wish people would understand more about what your philosophy, right? And looking to herbs and figuring out a different path forward to be healthier all around. And like, let's actually get to the root cause of these symptoms. Let's not just accept them and say, oh, okay, my doctor told me to take this pill for the rest of my life. And I pray every day that we start to develop more research and have greater funding for those particular kinds of things, because I think it would make a world of difference to people. And I often think about my own self, like, I didn't really realize how sick I was until I got better.
Yeah.
And then I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I was surviving. I mean, I felt like I was struggling to survive at that time too, but I wonder like how many people are just so sick that they don't even understand how sick they are. And I just wish that there was a way to show them how much better they would feel and perform and function as a human if they could just even have a day in feeling better, that they would then be incentivized a little bit more to do some of the harder work
Yeah. Yeah.
and take the time to develop themselves more. Um, okay, so that's going through quite a bit, and I have some other questions too, obviously, but can you just talk a little bit more about, for those who are having chronic illness or like Lyme or fibromyalgia, where should they really start when they're feeling overwhelmed? Because that's another thing too, is like, I feel like there's so many conflicting streams of information for people. I mean, clearly I could say the answer to that question is just to follow you and pay attention to what you say, but
Yeah.
what do people do? Because it is very confusing, and how do they really start to help themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think breaking it down to in categories and working with each category independently can sometimes help people. Taking herbs can do a lot of good right up in the very beginning because the herbs are counteracting a lot of things that are going on inside the body. Um, and but it's all about cellular health, and it's I don't think we think about it that way. We make disease very, very complicated in that we divide the body up into systems, and we assign specialists to the system. So we've got cardiologists and pulmonologists and endocrinologists and all these people. Um, and it just seems too unsurmountably complicated for the average person. And I've found that it evolved that way to be complicated in the medical system. And now they live with that. It's their worldview. And it's very hard to change your worldview once you're in it so deeply. And I find that a lot of physicians, I find it easier to talk to people that are outside the medical profession than inside the medical profession a lot of times because they just won't go there. It challenges their worldview. But it's really a lot more simple than that. And it's, I've certainly heard people accuse this explanation as being oversimplistic, but it really does work. The fact of the matter is, your whole body is made of cells. Everything. Every part of your body is made of cells held together with just a loose network of connective tissue. Everything that happens in your body, whether it's your heart beating or a brain impulse firing or thyroid hormone being produced, is all done by cells. If your cells are well, you'll be well. What symptoms are a reflection of cellular dysfunction. And a lot of times, a symptom will point to that cellular dysfunction. If you have heart symptoms, it's because your heart cells are stressed. But sometimes other symptoms like fatigue are suggesting that cells throughout your body are stressed. So that gives you a lot of information right up front that often is much more valuable than any lab you can get. All of the cells in your body come from one cell. We all started that way, and that cell divided and diversified into all the cells. But what that means is all of our cells are structurally different. Now, they may have been modified to do different jobs, but structurally they're all the same. So you can think of your cells as little microscopic biological machines. Like any machine, your cells have operating requirements that must be met for them to do their job. And that turns out is 5 things. That's it. And if they don't get those 5 things, they become stressed. They can't do their job. They become less functional. And if you have enough cells that are affected, you get a symptom, and enough symptoms, you get a chronic illness. But it gets down to the cells. So those 5 things are: cells need specific nutrients. Now, different cells in the body need different nutrients. Like thyroid cells need iodine, your heart cells burn mainly fat. So, but if you're eating a good, well-rounded whole food diet, that's a whole cell diet, you're getting all the things that all of your cells need. Pretty easy to cover right there. Your cells need a clean environment. to operate. And you look at all of the toxic chemicals we're exposed to, mainly sourced to coal, which is where heavy metals come from, and petroleum, which is the source of our pesticides and chemicals and plastics and what runs our cars. A lot of abnormal organic chemicals that are very easily absorbed in our body, but once they get to cells, they basically gum up the machinery so the cells can't work as well. And then you have natural toxins that grow in unnatural environments like mold inside of our house, and that the mycotoxins have an effect on cells. So it's basically interfering with how cells work. They become less functional. And certain kinds of radiation may affect our cells too, and unnatural radiation. So that's two, toxic environment. Number three is chronic stress, mental stress. And what that does is it keeps us from sleeping. Our cells need downtime to recover from being stressed. So, one of the key things about our cells that separate us out from every mechanical device made is our cells can repair themselves and they're constantly recovering from working. They're constantly replacing worn out parts and all that sort of thing through a process called autophagy. So our cells can rebuild themselves. And so that is fundamentally what healing is the ability of cells to recover from stress. Simple as that. But they need downtime during the day. And some cells, like our heart cells, have to rest in between beats because our heart never stops. But most of our cells need 8 hours of good sleep to recover from working the day before. And if they don't get that, if you're sleeping an average of 6 hours or 6.5 hours, which is average in America, you're starting your next day with a deficit that your cells haven't recovered from the day before. And you do that day after day after day, and your cells are in trouble and you get sick. Number four, physical stress. That can be trauma. You get, hit by a car or something like that. That's definitely going to damage your cells. But the other side of that is being sedentary. So our cells need physical activity to move blood, to flush out the debris, and so they can purge toxic substances and congestion that builds up. So blood flow, regular exercise, moderate physical activity through the day is essential for normal health. Most people are very sedentary. And then the fifth is the microbe factor, which we talked about, and that's our arch enemy to all of our cells because, quite frankly, what we are is food to microbes. That's why they want to get in our body. Everything that is living is food for something else. We are food for microbes. That's why they want to get into us. And some free food is free food, like what's in our gut, but the good stuff is our cells, and a lot of microbes are trying to get in our bloodstream to get to our cells because that's a food supply. So that's basically the formula of wellness. And as you age, your cells lose energy and become less functional. So as you age, you have less ability to recover. So you have to take better and better care of your cells. But those five things are the formula of wellness right there. If you're doing all those things, if you're eating a great diet and cleaning up your air and water and food and getting moderate exercise and sleeping 8 hours a night and taking herbs to keep down those microbes, there's a good chance you're going to be healthy. It's really as simple as that. Doesn't matter your diagnosis, anything else. You do those things really intensely, that's how you're going to fix it. Drugs, they actually compromise cellular health and do absolutely nothing to help with any of those stress factors. So they absolutely do nothing to promote healing in the body. Zero.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need them just to stabilize things. I get it. But they don't do anything to promote actual healing.
Yeah. And that certainly seems simple enough, but you're making me now think about something else too that's always coming up for people, and that's vaccines. How do you feel about those? Am I allowed to ask you that?
Yes. You can ask me about anything. I love good controversial questions. And most of the time, what you're going to find from me, if I have an opinion on something, it's a well-researched opinion that is based on my experience over 40 years and moving into, just studying all of the issues at hand. I think it depends a lot on what vaccine that you're talking about. And, so when I was born, it was just after they came out with the polio vaccine, and it was extraordinary because I was the first generation that didn't have to worry about being disabled by this virus. It was hugely frightening. And so when you look at a lot of things that people were dying of prior to 20th century, mid 20th century, vaccines were really an amazing solution to many of those things. And I think you don't throw out something that really has value. Um, so I think everything has a place. I would say every drug and every medical procedure has a place. We're just overutilizing them. And probably the same thing is true with vaccines in some cases, that vaccines have a very important place. I think, though, the other side of it is you've got the pharmaceutical industry that regularly profiteers off of drugs, including vaccines and a lot of other things, to push them on people that don't necessarily need them. So it is somewhat of a complicated topic. We could do a whole podcast on vaccines alone. But the short of it is it's risk versus benefit. And I think you've got to look at every situation. And I have in my life too. I didn't get vaccinated for measles. I did get measles. I got pretty sick, but I had friends that got extremely sick and were out of school for several weeks. And we made that go away. Now, there is some risk to that, but risk versus benefit overall, the vaccine has probably been beneficial. But we seem to be gravitating toward just giving kids more and more and more and more and more and more vaccines. And what I do know is that every time you take a vaccine, there's a downturn in the immune system. It suppresses. And so I don't think it's the vaccines as much as the fact that our world is polluted. And our kids are more vulnerable than adults to all these pollutants. Kids today don't play out in the woods. They play on soccer fields that are so saturated with Roundup. And I just saw a study that there's an increased risk of Parkinson's disease associated with all the chemicals they put on golf courses. So when you layer in all those other factors and you have people, you have young people that are growing and you're stressing their cells with all these toxins, and then you load them up with vaccines and they're in a compromised position. If they happen to have a virus at that time, it could potentially be devastating. But even so, you've got to look at risk versus benefits. And I think, that instead of eliminating vaccines and doing things that are stupid, I think we should do a better job of asking questions and really doing serious studies and controlling the amount of profit that the pharmaceutical companies are making so that they can produce the vaccines, but they're not pushing them when they don't need to be pushed. Um, but even if you want to cross into the mRNA vaccine, when COVID was coming down the pike, the first thing I did was explore herbs that might have activity against the SARS virus because we had nothing. And actually, there were a number of herbs that did have activity, not to eliminate it, but to attenuate it if I got it. And I was really sad to hear that a lot of the information was suppressed because I think it was really valuable. A lot of emphasis was put on vaccines. That in the first couple of months was a scary thing because there had been previous SARS epidemics that I was aware of that had mortality of 10 to 30%. Now, it turned out that the COVID mortality was less than 2%. Probably it's below 1% now. So it has been attenuated a good bit. So it wasn't the killer. And in the early days of the whole thing, I was trying to make that decision. I ended up getting the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, which was a traditional vaccine, which was kind of a passport. I had to have a little card to get on a plane or go on anywhere. So I did it. But by then, my fear was quite a bit less because coming out of Wuhan, they said, well, 50% of people aren't getting sick and 80% aren't needing medical care. But there were a few healthy people that were getting in and getting very sick. And I think that's because they got co-infections at the same time. So, I was very careful about social distancing and all of that. Wore mask, I think that was not an unreasonable thing to do. I finally got COVID a couple of times. I used herbs. It was like a year or two after I had actually gotten the vaccine. I never got another vaccine because I had some issues with the fact that the mRNA vaccine was such a new thing. And I still think we really do need to be paying attention to it and asking some questions. That being said, as I said earlier, there are 8 billion people on the planet and they're more mobile than they ever have been. And we have more contact with each other and contact with wildlife and 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 fowl and livestock than we ever have. And something else is coming. If it's a bird flu, we already have a traditional vaccine for that built. So that one it's a threat, but at least we've got something we can turn over pretty quickly. But SARS is not something to mess around with. It does tend to be true, though, that the higher their mortality, the easier it is to identify people that are sick and quarantine them. The problem with with COVID was there were so many people that weren't sick that were circulating it around, and that's why it spread so rapidly. But what do you say we get something that has a mortality of 5% instead of 1% that is that communicable? It spreads that easily. And it's 2 years out before we can get a traditional vaccine. But you could pull an mRNA vaccine a lot faster. I'm going to take the mRNA vaccine, even though I know there's some risk, because 5 to 10% mortality, that's scary. That means you're probably going to get pretty darn sick.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to look at everything. And I think that we should be asking questions about all of these things, but not necessarily saying, oh, all vaccines are bad. I think that's just nuts. It just leaves us wide open to so many things. And again, we're exposed to a whole lot more things than we ever have been, and things can travel a lot faster than they ever have in the past. And yeah, so if we don't have vaccines, we're in a pretty scary place.
Yeah. And I've thought about that a lot from that perspective too. Like there are certain things I think that it's good for. You're just making me think about additional parts of the equation when we're thinking about kids running on Roundup treated grass and golfers out there doing the same thing. And I had asked someone about ivermectin, and she had explained to me that the reason ivermectin was so successful for people is partially that we're having such a high parasitic load that our immune system is taxed with that. And so when the COVID comes, the immune system really can't react to it. But when we take the ivermectin, it knocks back the parasitic load. So then your immune system is able to act more fully against the COVID and you heal a lot quicker. Do you think there's any validity to that?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Okay.
If you study developed populations in the world, we have a lower parasitic load than ever before in humans.
Okay.
We do. And actually, some is natural, and we're suffering from it. I just wrote an article that I thoroughly researched that suggests that the absence of exposure to parasites, helminths, roundworms, that we get so few of them, is what's driving allergic reactions, mast cell activation syndrome, and so much of what's happening. Actually, some exposure reduces our allergies. So it may be the big reasons why kids and so many of us are having so many allergies. Now, not to say that anybody wants a load of parasites, and we do all pick things up from time to time, but that's where the herbs help balance it so that you have a normal relationship with these things instead of them overloading your body. Ivermectin has antiviral, antibacterial, and antiparasitic properties. So it does cover viruses. Interestingly, ivermectin, guess where it came from?
An herb?
No?
An herb? I'm not sure.
Okay. All antibiotics come from a natural source. I used to think, well, there's this smart scientist who's, figuring out these chemicals that kill bacteria. Nah, we're not that smart. We really, really aren't. We all pull from nature. And all antibiotics either come from a bacteria, a plant, or a fungus. And it's because all of those things have to defend themselves against bacteria. Even bacteria have to defend themselves against other bacteria. And those plants, funguses, and bacteria are using a chemical defense system that is different from our cellular defense system. It's why herbs work. We're basically borrowing the defense system of the plant. But when we develop an antibiotic, we're not taking that whole defense system from that organism. We're pulling one chemical. Why do we do that? Well, one, we don't have any ability. We're not smart enough to produce the defense system. We can only pull a chemical, and we modify that chemical so we can get a patent on it, because if you don't get a patent on it, you can't make back your investment for the antibiotic or whatever you generated. Cost about $2 billion to bring a drug to market. We haven't made any new antibiotics, zero new antibiotics since the 1980s when I was in medical school. Antibiotic resistant microbes kill over 1 million people every year, and that's been rising every year since the 90s. Important to know that. And that's another reason why herbs are so important, because that doesn't happen with herbs. Ivermectin came from a bacteria from a swampy area and a golf course in Japan. Yeah. And they pulled it out and they started pulling chemicals and they tested them against viruses and bacteria and protozoa, and they found that, and worms, and they found that, well, it works better for those things, but it still has other antibacterial properties too. So, in that, as far as COVID goes, I would have put the herbs up against ivermectin any day of the week, but nobody studied it because it was kind of taboo to do that. Nobody was looking at the herbs because nobody wanted to go there. If it's not a drug and we can't make money on it, we don't want people using that. I didn't have any problem with using ivermectin, but I think the herbs actually offered a lot better coverage. But I couldn't say anything about it.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wrote a big article about March of 2020 after, I'd really learned a lot of information about what was coming. And my staff said, you can't print that. You can't put that out there. And we didn't, because it would have caused too much controversy.
That's part of the thing I have an issue with science is like true science really looks at all sides of things and not just one focused viewpoint, right? And that's where I get a little bit concerned with what's happening in our Western medicine approach to life. And it's not, again, just one specific thing. Like we have to have different thought paths that are accepted. We have to be able to ask the questions. We have to be able to look at the different things and figure out there is more than one way to skin a cat. And we've been proven that so many times in history. So I'm sorry that that's the case, and you weren't necessarily comfortable to or able to release that, because I think that could have helped a lot of people. And
Yeah.
there were certain camps, I think, of the medical community that were willing to put themselves out there, but then you see them getting blacklisted or taken out of the community because of their beliefs. And it's unfortunate because, again, there's more than one way to do things. And I think as a human, I want to be able to have choice, and I would like to be able to say, that sounds better to me than that, and vice versa. And I don't want to have a
Yeah.
gun put to my head that you need to take this or you're not getting on a plane like that. I thought about it many times, and my world got very small quickly, but I was like, well, it's going to be all right. Whatever happens is going to be all right. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I have been grounded in science my whole life. I mean, I'm a fifth generation physician, and fourth generation. My son's fifth, but fourth generation physician. So I've known medicine for a long time. I got a chemistry degree, which is really very bounded by logic. How things actually work, and I think very logically. And the problem I have with science is what we call reductionist science. Instead of looking at all the possible information, you just look at a very condensed part of the information that's in your worldview. Some of that has to be, you have to control a little niche to look at something. So, people that are in direct research, I get that. But if you don't have people like me interpreting that research and bringing out the bigger picture of larger information, of all the information available, then you're going to lose. Um, I'm not a fan, quite frankly, of what's going on at NIH, that so many scientists are leaving the country and that we're defunding so much of science, because even a lot of that reductionist science is still science. And you can still take those pieces, and they're very important. And if you're not getting them, if you shut down your investment as a government in science, what happens is you get science that is funded by pharmaceutical companies or big interest companies. So you get very, very warped science. So a fair amount of what comes out of the NIH is warped science, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it's really good science. And PubMed, which is sponsored by NIH, it basically publishes every bit of science that's going on around the world. And I found that to be totally invaluable to get studies from South Africa and Europe and everywhere in the world, Japan, China, and pull as much information as I can pull to answer questions. And now we're at a point where we're starting to be able to use AI-generated search engines to pull in that bigger, wider body of information. So good science is about forming theories and then finding the information that supports or doesn't support those theories, so that you get really good, solid information. So that was something that was really important for me. When I found that herbs were working for me, I wanted to know the science behind why they were working. And that was there. We actually know more about how herbs work than we do most of our drugs. It's really amazing. And it comes from not research that was done mostly in the United States, but research that was done all around the world. But I had access to that through PubMed. And it was really wonderful. So when I was first really exploring herbs, I studied Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, European, etc. But then I started gravitating toward writers and conferences, and eventually doing my own research of looking at how the herbal phytochemistry is affecting us at the cellular level, at the physiologic level, how it's affecting microbes and the balance of microbes in our body. And that's when it really got interesting, that I really felt like I was onto something that was solid. And there's so much good information out there right now. And wow, you look at, I mean, it's like virtually every herb I've ever studied has been studied and has been defined as having anti-cancer properties. And, so it's all herbs have some antimicrobial properties. Some are better than others, but the antimicrobial properties of herbs aren't like an antibiotic. It's a spectrum of hundreds of chemicals. So you have this defense system that has intelligence. So it's affecting pathogens, but not normal flora in the body. And you don't get antibiotic resistant pathogens coming out of it. But it also is protecting ourselves from free radicals and toxic substances. So all those stress factors that I talked about, herbs are counteracting all of those things. So taking herbs, whatever you're doing to change your diet, to clean up your environment, to get better sleep, you're going to compound, you're going to accelerate that with taking herbs. You're going to get 10 times as much value. Because I had already made all those changes and I wasn't getting well. It was the herbs that made the difference that carried me the whole way. But there are a lot of herbs that you can take continually. So I've been taking herbal therapy for now 20 years. And my health is the best at age 67. My health has been the best over the past 10 years that I've had my whole life. You know, no gut issues. My joints don't hurt. My brain works great.
Yeah.
And I'm working with cells that are 67 years old. They've aged a lot. They don't have nearly the energy. Now, I don't have, the stamina and energy that I had when I was in my 30s. I don't expect to. But I am healthy because my cellular health is good. And a lot of that is diet and all the other things that I do to maintain my health. But a big piece of it is taking herbs every day. And there's good evidence to support that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think about just how much of a wide benefit herbs do have versus like an antibiotic, which just has a singular flight mission. Like it only knows how to go in there and kill, and it kills irregardless of whether it's something good or bad for us. And
Yep.
what we really need to do is take things that are supporting the body, supporting the beneficial parts of us, and helping to lessen the ones that are not so good for us. And so I value that a lot.
Yeah.
Just that viewpoint.
Well,
Um,
with chronic Lyme, I mean, I just look at all the people that are subjecting themselves to 6 months of IV antibiotics. Some people may get well, but a lot of them end up with long-term or life-term repercussions from that. And chronic Lyme disease, it's a big thing. There are a lot of people out there that are struggling with it. But people aren't dying of it specifically. They may gradually progress to other chronic illnesses that they die from, but they're not specifically dying from Lyme disease or the Lyme bacteria specifically. Antibiotic resistant pathogens, again, are killing 1 million people or more every year, and that's growing. That's an enormous problem. So antibiotics work best for a fast-growing bacteria like a pneumococcal infection. But once you cross a line of about 10 days, you start contributing to disrupting your gut flora and generating antibiotic resistance pathogens. So you do that for 6 months, and you're not only generating some pretty bad stuff in your body, you're contributing to a worldwide problem that's killing a lot of people. And I just don't think it's a good choice when we have such other better alternatives.
yeah, I cringe sometimes to think the fact that I was on antibiotics for 2.5 years, and I can hear your voice going like, antibiotics are not good for chronic Lyme, and it's like, I kind of miss that up front there. But I am nonetheless where I am now, and I'm like, would I do it again to take the antibiotics, knowing what I know now? Probably not. But
Yeah.
again, I'm just grateful that I've come out in the shape that I've come out, and I'm still doing pretty good. And I've got
Yeah.
some work to do. Of course, we're always going to have work to do in the body. Um, but I do think ultimately that, again, I had to really think outside the box. I only got 85% of the way better through antibiotics, and I really had to focus more on some alternative practices, and herbs was
Yeah.
definitely a big one on that. And I can remember when I first got sick, I was so afraid to take herbs at the same time as antibiotics. And I'm pretty sure it was your book that was like, no, 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 they're just going to enrich what the antibiotics are doing. It's okay to take those at the same time. And so then I
Yeah.
really lean more heavily on herbs to help myself. So
Yeah. I really feel like if everyone, the majority of people, if they did the herbs first and did them in the intense protocols that I recommend for people, um, yeah, people would have a better outcome than antibiotics and probably take about the same amount of time. It takes time because you asked me that question before, do we eradicate them from our body? We don't know. I mean, I'm probably still, no doubt I have dormant pathogens in my system somewhere, but my body is taking care of them. And taking herbs every day gives me insurance. And there's really no penalty for that. Again, all the antibiotics I'm taking, they have anti-cancer properties, cell protective properties. I have no side effects from them. And it's kind of like, wouldn't you do that? So I'm hoping that people move more to really trying the herbs intensely first. And that's a big part of my message is to do those things first. Um, do it as the best you can for as long as you can, for as hard as you can before you try other more invasive or toxic therapies. Because you just can't get well and stay well with therapies that are toxic to your cells. And that's it right there.
yeah. And can you share what herbs you take every day?
Right now, I'm taking cordyceps and reishi, which are two adaptogens. I take Chinese skullcap. That's a really nice antimicrobial. I take some milk thistle, some hawthorn, which is really good for your cardiovascular system. Um, and I typically are mixing up other herbs along the way. Turmeric, I take some turmeric, some boswellia, which are anti-inflammatories. Sometimes I add in some rhodiola or a little bit more stimulating adaptogen. If and I'm generally rotating in some kind of antimicrobial. So right now and I don't take the same thing all the time. I tend to rotate things around, but I'm taking a product that my company develops that has cordyceps and cryptolepis and some other products. But I'll probably only take that for 2 or 3 months, and then I won't take it again for another year or so, because I think your body does develop tolerance to the chemicals. But other herbs that are kind of core are andrographis and Japanese knotweed and cat's claw. Garlic is usually good. Berberine is really good for the gut. So there are just so many things that you can take.
That's what starts to happen, especially someone who studies these things and it's like, oh, I want to try that one and I want to try that one and can you take too many herbs? Is that
No,
possible?
it's really, there's no wrong answers. I think it's important. I wrote a book called The Cellular Wellness Solution that it's an herbal primer and it has a lot of great information. So when we look at herbs, it goes all the way from culinary herbs and plants that we would define as food plants, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of herbs that have poisonous properties. And actually, a lot of our drugs come from those plants. And then, kind of back from that a little bit, is herbs that have drug like properties that act like drugs or have some chemicals in them that act like drugs. St. John was a wort, or maybe kratom that's out there. They're going to act more like drugs. I tend to stay away from herbs that have drug like properties because drug like properties is drug like side effects too. So I stick with the herbs that are basically cell protectants, antimicrobial, adaptogens, things that you're not going to take and feel an effect with like you would feel from a drug. That are mainly just protecting your cells and calming the microbes. But again, the difference between an antibiotic and an herb is an herb is going to balance that complex relationship we have not only with bacteria and viruses, but also parasites in our gut. Again, we get some of those from time to time, and it's looking more and more like having, had declaring war on parasites is actually why we have so many allergies in our world. And so many kids have allergies that they're just not getting that exposure. I read an interesting article that suggested that our gluten sensitivity is because we have such clean wheat in this country. I've had so many people go to Europe and say, well, I can eat bread in Europe and it doesn't bother me a bit. Their flour apparently isn't as clean, and there are parasites that get in it, and parts of the parasites in the flour, and that has that effect of calming our immune system, so people don't get allergic reactions. So yeah, sometimes it's that science. It's asking the big questions and then actually looking for the evidence to support it. It's like there's very little evidence that where all the evidence suggests that people in developed countries have a very low rate of carrying parasites compared to third world countries or humans historically.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some more research into that because I was also thinking part of the gluten intolerance is because of the glyphosate exposure that our food is put towards
Could be. Yeah.
European. Yeah,
Could be. Either way, I don't really eat much with flour.
so me neither.
It's
Me neither.
yeah. I'm not like a paleo diet. But I don't eat a lot of grain. So
Yeah,
and yeah, it's organic when I eat it.
yeah, that's how I am. So, but I'm trying to keep an eye on time here, and I know that we've gone over a little bit from an hour, but
That's all
um,
right.
thank you. I really do appreciate this because again, I I follow you, I listen to you often, and I read your book. Like I've got your Unlocking Lyme here for people who are listening. This is a fantastic book that I would highly encourage you to check out. Again, it's available on audio as well as in the paper form. But again, for me, audio was how I started off on figuring things out for myself, just because my brain was too broken to really get into the nitty gritty of the actual paper books. And I just really appreciate your time. And as a final question for you, this is something that I like to ask all of my guests, but since you're someone who's gone through this, could you tell me what is the best thing that's happened to you as a result of getting Lyme and tick-borne illness?
Probably the ad itself, I mean, it turned my whole life around. If it were not for Lyme disease, I would probably still be a conventional physician, probably reaching retirement age and completely naive to all the things that I've learned. And without that experience, yeah, it's just it's opened up so much in my world. And it's helped me see things that I would have never have seen. I would have had that same kind of closed worldview. And looking back on that potential life kind of makes me sad, really, because my life has been so much more rich, being that I went through that experience. And it's connected me with so many more people. And I mean, I've looked at the number of people that I've helped over the past 20 years compared to what I would have done just practicing as a conventional physician. And gosh, I've just had so much more opportunity. You just not very many people get that. So I've been really lucky.
Yeah. And that makes me want to cry just thinking about that. And it's like, God picks us for a reason. And I want my listeners to understand that you might be really questioning why you're going through this, but
Yeah.
once you get through it, you very well might be somebody like Dr. Rawls sitting here and being like, I'm so grateful, or myself, like, I'm so grateful for this because this has completely changed my life path. I could look back and see where I was headed, and it was not in a very pleasant way. And I'm so grateful that it happened. I needed it to happen to wake me up to understand that there is a different way to live and a much more fulfilling and healthful lifestyle that I can live. And now here we're both teachers for other people and showing them a way and giving them a little bit of hope and light and understanding that you're going to be okay. It takes some time. It's not going to necessarily be overnight, unfortunately, but it's completely doable. And I think also the way that you share your information is so beautiful because it's digestible, it's understandable by people. It's not like I was trying to read, oh no, of course it's gonna not be in my head. Someone protocol that people turn to for this. Why can I not think of his name? He writes a lot of books and they're really dense. And like, I was trying to read it and it was just like, even in a healthy brain, I was like, I can't even process this information. Like, this isn't anything that I want to sit and read. This is saving my life, but it's horribly painful. Like, yours is, again, very palatable, very easy to understand, and you speak it in more of layman's terms. So I appreciate that about you too, because it's hard enough when you're not feeling well to figure things out. But then again, when someone's putting it to you, Booner's books, it's like,
I was getting ready to say probably Stephen Booner. You're right. I mean, we we owe a lot to Stephen Booner. There's no doubt about it. I have read all of his books. In fact, they're sitting on that shelf right there. But that being said, I reached a point that I was moving beyond because he was still with each, he took each of the co-infections and he did this elaborate science of looking at which herbs would target each co-infection. And I've realized what we know about now is probably just scratching the surface. And it's not these lethal pathogens, it's these stealth microbes that can be in our system without even causing illness. And it's not the pathogen as much as loss of the body's ability to contain the pathogens that's a problem. So all of his herbal knowledge was great, but if you were trying to cover everything that he wrote about, you'd be taking like 100 things a day. I mean, it's just, and he made it so complex that it was just beyond the understanding. And what I realized is it just doesn't have to be so complicated. Um, but you were talking about purpose, and I just wanted to add that was my turning point. So for a long time, it was like, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this. I've been a good person, I've worked hard in my life. Why am I getting slammed with this? To change over and start asking that question, okay, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me here that I can help other people with that? And when I reached that point was the point that I started moving forward in my recovery and everything started falling into place. And so I challenge people to look for that. And there's purpose in everything. And it's sure it's a bad ride. It's not fun, but in the same respect, there are still ways that you can contribute to the world and to society. And you should be looking at that to look beyond your symptoms, beyond your illness, to how you can still be productive, how you can still make a difference in the world. And that will help you find a pathway.
yeah. I had asked, I don't have children and I was kind of floundering for a purpose in life. And I was like, I think I'm going to be part of Make-A-Wish Foundation. I literally said to my friend, like, I feel like I need more purpose. And I'm pretty sure it was the day before I got my diagnosis. And so I will also say, be careful what you wish for, because there was my purpose, right? And it's completely, again,
Yeah.
changed the path of my life. And God gives us gifts in some of the strangest ways, and I'm just really grateful ultimately. And I am very grateful for your time. I'm very grateful for you as a human. I wish I could give you a big hug. I'm just truly like,
I
you
will get to do that
changed
sometime.
my life. Yeah, you changed my life, and I am really grateful for that as well. So I wish you the best. I'm so glad that you're here in a healthy capacity to help teach other people, because you really are a wonderful teacher. You really have a good gift for that, and making people understand things in a way that relates to them to be able to do it. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Have a really good afternoon.
All right. Bye.